What's up you guys, TechChucker here, and we are gonna do a tutorial, a diorama tutorial. It's been ages since my last one. So today, what we're gonna do, we're gonna take this plain Jane diorama. I've had this diorama for quite a few years. It was one of the first that I did. We're gonna spruce it up just a little bit with a little bit of ground foliage. You can go to your hobby stores. There's a lot of different kinds. Let's see if it'll focus here. This is the kind that I'm using. This is actually a clumped version. You can get the fine grain stuff. I like the clumped a little bit more. It goes faster and it gives me the look that I want. What we're gonna do is we're gonna throw a little bit of moss and grass into the corners of our bricks and a little bit on the sidewalks. And then maybe in a future video, I'll show you some techniques for making your moss and this lichen stuff kind of go up the wall. It's really just gonna make that diorama pop just a little bit more, give it a little bit more realism. You can take this and make it look like this. So let's go ahead and get prepped, get the table all set, and get started. Big addition. Before we get started, some supplies that you're gonna need. You're gonna need your moss, lichen sort of stuff that you can get anywhere. There's also tutorials on how to make some of this stuff yourself. I just went out and bought this. I think it was 10 bucks. You're gonna need some Elmer's glue. If you are over in the UK, I think they just call this PVC glue. Pretty simple. I think this is like a 99-cent bottle. And then you're gonna need some sort of a tool. Let's see if this focuses. This is just a sculpting tool that I had ages ago. And this is a very, very flat edge. Nothing too spectacular. So if you've got a piece of cardboard, you could cut that and use that. Because we're just gonna push this into some of the edges in some spots. And then you're not even gonna need any tools. You just use your fingers. So very simple, 3 steps. That's about it. And then maybe a little bit later, a stir stick, because we're gonna water down some of that glue. But let's go ahead and get started. You kind of wanna lay out where you think you wanna put all of your grass. And it makes kind of a difference because in real life, your high traffic areas really don't have much for grass and moss and whatnot, especially, you know, on a walking surface. It's the edges and areas that people just aren't really walking all that much. Usually it's right on the edges of your sidewalk. And normally sidewalks are raised, this particular one isn't, but I'm probably gonna put some along here. And then in some of these holes that you have, you might consider putting some moss in there as well. And you know, if you really are unsure, go check online. You can certainly look for a lot of pictures of city streets so that you can get a better idea as to where you might want to put some grasses and mosses to make it look a little more natural. All right, so now that we kind of have an idea as to where we're gonna go ahead and get started with adding some moss. I like to get a little dish and throw just a little bit of my moss in there because we're not gonna work with a huge amount of this stuff, and I don't really care for having this giant bag hanging around. Make sure that you've got your little tool, whatever kind of tool it is that you're gonna use. I prefer not to have a pointed. This one happens to have a point on it. I don't need or want a point. I want it to be a flat edge. So make sure whatever it is that you're using is kind of flat because we're gonna be pushing into these crevices. And then make sure you've got your Elmer's glue, your PVA glue, whatever you want to call it. And then I like to have a damp paper towel just hanging around. That way then I can kind of wipe off the excess glue. It just makes it a little bit easier. And then of course have a dry paper towel to dry off your hands. Let's get started. First things first is you don't want to have this giant glob. You want to break this down into smaller pieces, and that way then they're a little more manageable. And now that we've got these all broken down in manageable pieces, set that aside, figure out which cracks you're going to be putting this stuff into first. I figured I've got a couple of little hole-like things here. I'm gonna start with one of those. Open up your glue and just put a little bit of glue in there. Not a whole lot, doesn't need to be very much. All right, so then I'm just gonna go ahead and take some of these small pieces and maybe make them a little bit smaller just because it is a relatively small crack. There you go. No, we're not done. Now, in order to get this to stay in place, I kind of just jam it in there. The main thing as you're jamming this in, you just don't want to jam it so far that you're just not going to see any of it. You want some of it to stick out and some of it to be in. That way then it is fully stuck in there. And don't worry, you're going to see a little bit of the white glue around it. Once it dries, it will dry clear for the most part. And then you should be good. You should just see your green. And then just move on to your other cracks, adding a little bit of glue in each. And again, looking at some pictures of what actual, moss looks like in cracks can really help. Because if you only do, a very geometric look, meaning you just do one little line, you just do this little part, that's just not gonna look all that realistic. So we wanna try and get this to look as realistic as possible. Just be careful that you don't accidentally cut your brick, because you don't wanna have to go back and touch up with paint if you don't have to. So we're gonna go ahead and just do a whole bunch of this, and then we'll come back. Maybe I'll do a little speed up of this so you can see the process. But essentially it's very, very simple. And then I'll show you what we do at the very end to kind of cure it, make sure that everything's gonna stay in place. All right, so we've made some progress here, and I just kind of wanted to note a couple of things. When you're actually putting your moss in, I want you to be thinking not about getting full coverage of everything, even if it's in the areas that you want to focus on. You don't want full coverage, because you've got details here that you either want to accent or you want to add to that. You don't want to overrun it with too much moss. Just be aware that you don't need to cover the whole thing. And then the other piece to it is kind of the evenness of all of this, meaning how deep do you really need to push all of your moss down, and how much can you leave it up a little bit. On your first pass, when you first put it in, you're gonna find that some of it's not super even. Like this one here is kind of pushed up a little bit more than maybe I would like. And so later on, I'll probably come back and I might push this back in just a little bit. But the one thing that you do want to know is that you don't need to have everything all at, surface level. It doesn't need to be even with your brick. Now, if this is a diorama that you want your action figure standing on, you may want to have it level with your bricks, because otherwise that's just gonna make it much harder for your figures to stand. So we're just gonna continue on as best we can. All right, so one of the other things that people might be wondering is, well, why do I have to jam this in to the cracks? Why couldn't I just, glue it on and call it good? Here's the deal, you can. It all depends on the look that you're going for. I'm going for a somewhat worn look. Now, you certainly can just glue it right on top, and that would take a lot less effort, a lot less work. And actually right over here is a little bit of what I did. I didn't push it in as much. Right here we didn't, we just glued it right on top. So essentially that is what I'm doing. But for this particular look, I want it to have a very specific worn look. And to do that, you want this to be embedded in those cracks just a little bit. But your project, you do whatever you want. All right, so I'm just gonna go ahead and finish all of this off. But before I do want to show you the one last thing that you need to do. Once you've got this all the way that you want it, you're gonna grab a brush, just a cheapo brush, and then take some of your PVA or your Elmer's glue, throw it in a little cup and then water it down. You're gonna want it really pretty watery, because you're gonna wanna be able to get this to drip essentially onto this, so that you can give it one last little coat of glue so that it really stays put. And once you do that, then you're gonna go ahead and dip that in and drip it in, and it's just gonna soak right on in. That way then you have that last little layer of glue to keep this where you want it. Then let it dry and you should be good to go. All right, so let's go ahead and cut, and we'll give you a final look at the final project. I hope this was helpful. If it was, make sure you hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Leave a comment below. What do you think of this? Are you planning on trying out this technique? Do you have a better technique? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. And until next time, I will see you later.